The ring worn by a man in a 1901 photo tells a story nobody expected. Emma Rodriguez had always loved visiting her grandfather's estate in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but today felt different as she sorted through decades of accumulated memories in the sprawling adobe house. Following her grandfather Miguel's recent passing, the family had gathered to organize his extensive collection of photographs, documents, and artifacts that chronicled their family's long history in the American Southwest. The late afternoon sun streamed through the traditional vigas overhead, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors as Emma carefully examined each photograph in her grandfather's prized collection. Miguel had been the family historian, meticulously documenting their lineage and preserving stories that stretched back to the earliest Spanish settlements in New Mexico. She paused at a formal studio portrait dated 1901, featuring a distinguished man in his 30s wearing an elegant three-piece suit. The sepia-toned photograph showed remarkable clarity for its age, and every detail of the subject's appearance was captured with precision. According to the notation on the back, this was Joaquin Rodriguez, her great-great-grandfather, photographed in Santa Fe just after the turn of the century. Emma had seen this photograph countless times during family gatherings, listening to stories about Joaquin's success as a merchant and his reputation as one of Santa Fe's most respected citizens. But today, examining the image with fresh eyes and better lighting, something caught her attention that she had never noticed before. On Joaquin's left hand, clearly visible as he rested it on the arm of an ornate chair, was an unusual ring that seemed oddly out of place for a prosperous New Mexican merchant of 1901. The ring appeared to be made of a dark metal, possibly iron or steel, with an intricate design that didn't match the typical gold or silver jewelry favored by wealthy Hispanic families of that era. Most intriguingly, the ring bore what appeared to be symbols or markings around its band, symbols that didn't look Spanish, Mexican, or American. Emma reached for a magnifying glass from her grandfather's desk and studied the ring more closely. The symbols were definitely intentional, carefully crafted, and appeared to tell some kind of story or convey specific meaning. "That's strange," she murmured to herself, her voice echoing in the quiet room. Her family had always prided themselves on their well-documented Spanish colonial heritage, tracing their lineage back to the earliest settlers who had arrived with the Oñate expedition in 1598. Every piece of jewelry, every family heirloom had been cataloged and explained over the generations. But this ring was different. It didn't fit the narrative of their family's carefully preserved history, and its unusual design suggested origins that had nothing to do with Spanish colonial New Mexico. Emma felt a familiar excitement building, the same feeling she got when working on complex historical research projects for her job as a museum curator in Denver. She carefully photographed the portrait from multiple angles, paying special attention to the mysterious ring. Something told her that this small detail, overlooked for over a century, might unlock secrets about her family that no one had ever suspected. The formal pose, the careful positioning of Joaquin's hands, the prominent display of the ring, it all seemed too deliberate to be coincidental. As the sun set over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, Emma realized she was about to embark on an investigation that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her family's history. The next morning, Emma called her Aunt Carmen, the current family matriarch and keeper of the Rodriguez family genealogy. At 78, Carmen possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of family history and had spent decades researching their Spanish colonial roots, even traveling to Spain to trace their ancestry back to Andalusia. "Tia Carmen," Emma said, trying to contain her excitement as she held the phone, "I'm going through Abuelo Miguel's photographs, and I found something interesting in the 1901 portrait of Joaquin." "Ah, that beautiful photograph." Carmen's voice warmed with pride. "Your great-great-grandfather was such a handsome man, and so successful. He owned 3 general stores and was very respected in the territory before statehood. What did you find, mija?" Emma hesitated, wondering how to explain her discovery without sounding dramatic. "He's wearing a ring that looks unusual for that time period. It's made of dark metal with symbols that don't look Spanish or Mexican. Have you ever noticed it before?" A long pause stretched across the phone line. Carmen had examined every family photograph countless times, creating detailed family trees and documenting every piece of family history for the younger generations. "A ring with symbols?" Carmen repeated slowly. "Emma, I've studied that photograph for years. I helped your grandfather identify and catalog all the family portraits when I was working on our genealogy project. What kind of symbols? They're hard to make out, but they look like they might be letters or characters from a different alphabet. The ring itself doesn't look like typical Hispanic jewelry from that era. Another pause. Mija, could you bring that photograph to me? I have Joaquin's personal papers that came down through the family. Maybe there's something I missed, some explanation I overlooked. As Emma drove from Santa Fe to Carmen's home in Albuquerque, her mind raced with questions. How could such a prominent detail in a family photograph have gone unnoticed for so long? And what could the mysterious symbols possibly mean in the context of their well-documented Spanish colonial heritage? The familiar landscape of northern New Mexico stretched around her, the same high desert terrain her ancestors had called home for over 4 centuries. But today, everything felt different, as if she was seeing her homeland through new eyes that had glimpsed something that challenged the foundation of her family's identity. Carmen's adobe home in Albuquerque's Old Town was filled with carefully preserved family documents, photographs, and artifacts that represented generations of New Mexican Hispanic culture. As a retired librarian and amateur historian, she had turned her home into an unofficial family archive. "Show me this mysterious ring," Carmen said as Emma spread the 1901 photograph across her dining room table. She reached for her reading glasses and a powerful magnifying glass she used for examining old documents. After several minutes of careful study, Carmen's expression grew puzzled. "You're absolutely right, Emma. There is something unusual about this ring. The symbols are definitely intentional, and they don't match anything in our family's documented history." Carmen walked to a large filing cabinet and withdrew a folder thick with documents. These are Joaquin's business papers, personal letters, and legal documents from the territorial period. I've read through everything multiple times while researching our family history. Let me see if there's any mention of unusual jewelry or anything that might explain this ring. They spent the next 2 hours carefully examining documents, but found no mention of the ring or anything that might explain its origin. The papers confirmed what the family had always known. Joaquin was a successful businessman, respected community member, and proud descendant of Spanish colonists. But there was no hint of any connection to other cultures or traditions that might explain the strange ring with its mysterious symbols. Determined to understand the ring's significance, Emma decided to research the broader historical context of 1901 New Mexico territory. She drove to the University of New Mexico's Center for Southwest Research, where she had conducted research during graduate school and maintained relationships with several historians specializing in the territorial period. Dr. Patricia Valdez, a professor of Southwestern history whom Emma had known for years, welcomed her into her office filled with books, maps, and artifacts from New Mexico's territorial era. A respected scholar in her 50s with graying hair and intelligent dark eyes, Dr. Valdez had spent her career studying the complex cultural interactions in the American Southwest. "Emma, how wonderful to see you. I heard about your grandfather's passing. My condolences." Miguel was a treasure trove of family history. "What brings you back to our archives?" Emma showed her the photograph and explained her discovery of the unusual ring. Dr. Valdez studied the image carefully, her expression growing increasingly intrigued. "This is fascinating," Dr. Valdez said, adjusting her glasses to examine the ring's details. "The symbols definitely aren't Spanish, and they don't match any of the Native American symbolic traditions I'm familiar with from this region." She turned to her computer and began searching through digital archives of territorial-era photographs and documents. The early 1900s were a time of significant cultural complexity in New Mexico territory. While the dominant narrative focuses on Hispanic and Anglo populations, there were actually many other groups present that history has largely overlooked. Dr. Valdez pulled up several historical documents on her screen. For instance, there were small communities of immigrants from the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and even Asia who came to New Mexico during the mining booms and railroad construction of the late 1800s. Many of these groups assimilated quickly and their stories were forgotten. Emma leaned forward, intrigued. "Are you suggesting Joaquin might have had connections to one of these immigrant communities?" "It's possible," Dr. Valdez replied. "The symbols on the ring could be from any number of cultural traditions. Let me show you something." She opened a file of photographs from the territorial archives. These are images from various New Mexican communities between 1880 and 1910. Look at the diversity of people and cultural artifacts present in what most people assume was simply a Hispanic and Anglo-frontier society. The photographs revealed a surprising multicultural landscape. Lebanese merchants, Chinese railroad workers, Jewish traders, Italian miners, and various other immigrant groups who had made New Mexico their home during the territorial period. Dr. Valdez, is there any way to identify what cultural tradition these symbols might represent? Emma asked, pointing to the ring in the photograph. We'd need to consult specialists in various cultural traditions and writing systems, Dr. Valdez replied. But I have colleagues who might be able to help. The symbols could be Arabic, Hebrew, Cyrillic, or from any number of other traditions. She made several phone calls, arranging for Emma to meet with professors specializing in Middle Eastern studies, Eastern European history, and Asian cultural traditions. If this ring does represent a hidden aspect of your family history, we should be able to identify its origins. As Emma left the university, she realized that her simple question about an unusual ring was opening up entirely new possibilities about her family's past. The carefully documented Spanish colonial heritage might be only part of a much more complex story. Emma's first appointment was with Dr. Amara Hassan, a professor of Middle Eastern studies who specialized in Arabic calligraphy and cultural artifacts. Dr. Hassan's office walls were covered with beautiful examples of Arabic script and Islamic art, creating an atmosphere of scholarly elegance that reminded Emma of her grandfather's reverence for cultural preservation. The symbols are intriguing, Dr. Hassan said after examining high-resolution photographs of the ring through her specialized magnifying equipment. They're definitely not Arabic script, but there are elements that suggest possible Middle Eastern influence, particularly in the geometric patterns around the band. She compared the ring's symbols to various examples of Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman calligraphy, but couldn't find a definitive match. However, the metalwork style and the way the symbols are integrated into the ring design does remind me of jewelry traditions from the Levantine region, modern-day Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. Dr. Hassan's analysis was thorough but inconclusive. I'd recommend showing this to my colleague Dr. Kowalski, who specializes in Eastern European and Slavic cultural traditions. Some of these symbols could potentially be from Cyrillic or other Slavic writing systems. Emma's next stop was Dr. John Kowalski's office in the Slavic Studies Department. Dr. Kowalski, an energetic man in his 60s with a passion for Eastern European history, examined the photographs with equal intensity. Very interesting indeed, he said, comparing the symbols to examples of various Slavic writing systems. These aren't standard Cyrillic characters, but there are elements that suggest possible Polish, Russian, or Czech influences, particularly in the way certain symbols are constructed. He pulled out several reference books showing examples of historical Slavic jewelry and metalwork. The ring's overall design and the integration of symbols into the metalwork is consistent with Eastern European craft traditions from the late 1800s. But like Dr. Hassan, Dr. Kowalski couldn't provide a definitive identification. The symbols might be abbreviated names, dates, or religious phrases, but without more context, it's difficult to determine their exact meaning. Emma's final consultation was with Dr. Lisa Chen, a professor of East Asian studies who specialized in Chinese and Japanese cultural artifacts. Dr. Chen's office was filled with beautiful examples of Asian calligraphy, ceramics, and metalwork that reflected centuries of artistic tradition. "This is quite unusual," Dr. Chen said after studying the photographs carefully. "The symbols aren't Chinese or Japanese characters, but there's something about their construction that suggests possible influence from East Asian writing systems, particularly in the way they're arranged in vertical columns." She showed Emma examples of various Asian symbolic traditions, including Chinese seal script, Japanese clan symbols, and Korean ceremonial inscriptions. The geometric elements around the ring's band also remind me of designs used in traditional Asian metalwork. After consulting with all three cultural experts, Emma realized that the ring's symbols represented a complex puzzle that might incorporate influences from multiple cultural traditions. None of the professors could definitively identify the script, but each had noticed elements that suggested their area of expertise might be relevant. This suggests that whoever created this ring might have had exposure to multiple cultural traditions, Emma concluded as she reviewed her notes from the three consultations. That's actually quite remarkable for New Mexico in 1901. Emma decided to investigate the possibility that Joaquin had connections to immigrant communities that weren't reflected in the family's documented Spanish colonial heritage. She returned to the Center for Southwest Research and began examining immigration and census records from New Mexico Territory during the late 1800s and early 1900s. Working with archival databases and historical documents, She discovered that New Mexico's territorial period had indeed been far more culturally diverse than most family histories suggested. The mining booms, railroad construction, and territorial economic development had attracted immigrants from around the world, many of whom had intermarried with established Hispanic families. "This is remarkable," Emma murmured as she scrolled through census records from 1900. The documents revealed Lebanese merchants in Las Vegas, New Mexico, Polish miners in Raton, Chinese railroad workers throughout the territory, and Jewish traders in various frontier communities. She began focusing specifically on Santa Fe records from the 1890s and early 1900s, looking for any evidence of international immigrants who might have had business or personal connections with Joaquin Rodriguez. As a prominent merchant, he would have had extensive business relationships throughout the territory. In the 1900 territorial census, Emma found something intriguing: a listing for Abraham Kowalczyk, jeweler, age 45, born Poland, living on San Francisco Street in Santa Fe, just 3 blocks from where Joaquin's main store had been located. Further research revealed that Kowalczyk had emigrated from Poland in 1887 and established a jewelry and watch repair business in Santa Fe that served many of the territory's prominent families. His shop specialized in custom metalwork and repair of fine jewelry, exactly the kind of establishment that might have created or modified an unusual ring. Emma also discovered records of other international immigrants in Santa Fe during that period. Khalil Mansour, a Lebanese merchant who traded in luxury goods; Chen Wei-ming, a Chinese herbalist who served both Hispanic and Anglo communities; and several other individuals whose skills and services would have brought them into contact with successful businessmen like Joaquin. The pieces are starting to fit together, Emma realized as she photocopied relevant documents. If Joaquin had business relationships with any of these immigrant craftsmen or merchants, it could explain how he acquired a ring with symbols from multiple cultural traditions. She decided to research each of these individuals more thoroughly, looking for any documentation of their relationship with the Rodriguez family or evidence of their specific cultural and artistic traditions. The immigration records also revealed that many of these international immigrants had deliberately obscured their cultural origins in official documents, often adopting Americanized names or claiming origins from more acceptable countries to avoid discrimination. This pattern of cultural hiding could explain why Joaquin's connection to international communities wasn't reflected in the family's preserved history. As Emma gathered copies of all relevant documents, she realized that her investigation was revealing not just her family's hidden history, but the broader story of cultural diversity in territorial New Mexico that had been largely forgotten by official historical narratives. Emma's research into Abraham Kowalczyk proved remarkably fruitful. At the New Mexico State Archives in Santa Fe, she discovered that Kowalczyk had maintained detailed business records that had been donated to the State Historical Collection by his descendants in the 1960s. The records, stored in acid-free boxes and carefully preserved, contained order books, customer lists, and detailed descriptions of custom jewelry pieces created between 1890 and 1920. Emma's heart raced as she found Joaquin Rodriguez's name listed multiple times in Kowalczyk's customer records. Custom ring commission for J. Rodriguez, read an entry dated September 15, 1901. Special design incorporating symbols from customer's heritage. Materials: iron ring band, silver inlay work, custom engraving per customer specifications. Payment: $25. Considerable sum for the period. The entry was accompanied by a detailed sketch of the ring design that matched exactly what Emma could see in the 1901 photograph. But more importantly, the sketch included notes written in what appeared to be Polish, along with symbols that corresponded to those on Joaquin's ring. Emma immediately contacted Dr. Kowalski from UNM, explaining her discovery and asking if he could help translate Kowalczyk's notes. Dr. Kowalski was thrilled by the historical significance of the find and agreed to meet her at the archives the following day. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Kowalski said as he examined the original documents with white cotton gloves. Kowalczyk's notes are in Polish, and they provide detailed information about the ring's symbolism. He began translating the jeweler's notes. Customer requests ring incorporating symbols from family heritage, Spanish colonial, Sephardic Jewish, and Moorish traditions. Symbols represent family name, religious protection, and historical connection to Al-Andalus period in Spain. Emma felt a chill of recognition. Sephardic Jewish, but our family has always identified as Catholic Hispanic colonists. Dr. Kowalski continued reading Kowalczyk's notes. Customer explains that family heritage includes ancestors who were conversos, Jews who converted to Christianity during Spanish Inquisition but maintained cultural traditions in secret. Ring to commemorate this hidden heritage while appearing as simple personal jewelry. The notes also included sketches of individual symbols with their meanings: Hebrew letters representing family name, Arabic geometric patterns signifying connection to Moorish Spain, and Christian crosses indicating Catholic conversion. The combination created a complex artistic representation of centuries of religious and cultural complexity. According to Kowalczyk's records, Dr. Izao Kowalski continued, Joaquin specifically requested that the ring appear unremarkable to casual observers, but contain deep meaning for family members who understood its significance. Emma stared at the documents. Her understanding of her family history completely transformed. The carefully preserved narrative of Spanish colonial heritage was true, but incomplete. Her ancestors had carried the additional burden and richness of hidden Jewish identity, preserved through centuries of religious persecution and cultural suppression. Kowalczyk's records also revealed that he had created similar pieces for several other New Mexican families with converso heritage, suggesting that Joaquin's experience was part of a broader pattern of hidden Jewish identity in the Southwest. This explains why the ring's symbols seem to incorporate multiple cultural traditions. Emma realized it was designed to represent the complex reality of Sephardic Jewish families who had navigated centuries of religious persecution while maintaining their cultural identity in secret. Armed with this new understanding of her family's possible Sephardic Jewish heritage, Emma contacted Dr. Sarah Horowitz, a professor at the University of New Mexico, who specialized in the history of Crypto-Judaism and converso families in the American Southwest. Dr. Horowitz had written extensively about the hidden Jewish communities that had maintained their traditions in secret for centuries after the Spanish Inquisition. Your discovery is remarkable, but not entirely surprising, Dr. Horowitz explained during their meeting in her office, which was filled with books about Jewish history in Spain and the Americas. We estimate that a significant percentage of New Mexican Hispanic families have some Sephardic Jewish ancestry, though most are unaware of it because the traditions were hidden for survival. Dr. Horowitz explained the historical context that made Joaquin's ring both necessary and dangerous. The Spanish Inquisition forced Jewish families to convert to Christianity or face exile or death. Many families converted publicly but maintained Jewish traditions in private, becoming known as conversos or crypto-Jews. She showed Emma maps and genealogical charts illustrating how these families had spread throughout the Spanish colonial empire, including northern New Mexico. When these families arrived in New Mexico as early as the 1590s, they continued practicing Judaism in secret, while appearing to be devout Catholics in public. The hidden traditions were passed down through generations using coded symbols, secret rituals, and careful oral transmission of knowledge. By the late 1800s, many families had lost conscious awareness of their Jewish heritage, but some had preserved fragments through family customs that seemed merely cultural rather than religious. Dr. Horowitz was particularly interested in Kowalczyk's documentation of the ring's symbolism. The fact that Joaquin consciously understood his family's converso heritage in 1901 is significant. Most families by that period had lost that knowledge or were afraid to acknowledge it. She explained that the ring represented a form of cultural courage that was rare and risky. Creating physical evidence of Jewish heritage, even in coded form, required tremendous trust in the craftsman and confidence that the symbols would remain secret. Dr. Horowitz also shared research about other crypto-Jewish families in New Mexico who had preserved their heritage through similar means: secret family recipes, modified religious practices, and carefully preserved cultural traditions that maintained Jewish identity while appearing completely Catholic to outside observers. Your family's story is part of a much larger narrative about religious survival and cultural preservation, she explained. The ring wasn't just personal jewelry. It was a form of resistance against centuries of religious persecution. Emma learned that many crypto-Jewish families had maintained traditions like lighting candles on Friday nights, explained as honoring saints, avoiding pork, attributed to personal preference, and preserving certain Hebrew prayers, disguised as Catholic devotions. The challenge now, Dr. Horowitz suggested, is determining how much of your family's traditional practices might actually be preserved Jewish customs that were explained in Catholic terms. Emma realized she needed to examine her family's cultural traditions with entirely new understanding, looking for evidence of crypto-Jewish practices that had been disguised as Hispanic Catholic customs for centuries. Emma returned to her Aunt Carmen with a completely new perspective on their family's traditional practices. She brought copies of Dr. Horowitz's research on crypto-Jewish traditions and Kowalczyk's documentation about the ring's symbolism, preparing to have what might be a difficult conversation about hidden aspects of their heritage. "Tia Carmen," Emma began carefully, "I've learned some remarkable things about Joaquin's ring and what it might tell us about our family history." Carmen listened intently as Emma explained the discovery of the jeweler's records and the ring's connection to Sephardic Jewish heritage. Her aunt's expression moved through surprise, confusion, and finally, a kind of recognition that seemed to come from deep memory. "You know, mija," Carmen said slowly, "there have always been things about our family traditions that seemed different from other Hispanic families, but I never questioned them." Carmen began describing family customs that she had always attributed to regional variations in New Mexican Hispanic culture. Her grandmother's insistence on lighting special candles every Friday evening for protection, the family's traditional avoidance of pork despite having no religious prohibition against it, and certain prayers that her great-grandmother had taught in what seemed like archaic Spanish, but might have been something else entirely. "And there was always the bread," Carmen remembered. "My grandmother made a special braided bread every Friday that she said was for Sunday dinner, but we always ate it Friday night with the candles." Emma's heart raced as she recognized these as potentially Jewish traditions: Shabbat candles, kashrut dietary laws, and challah bread. "Tia, did great-grandmother ever explain why these traditions were important?" "She always said they were family customs that kept us connected to our ancestors," Carmen replied. "She was very secretive about some things, always warning us not to discuss certain family practices with outsiders." Carmen walked to her kitchen and retrieved a wooden box from a high shelf. "I've kept some of great-grandmother's things that I never really understood. Maybe you should see them." The box contained several items that took on new meaning in light of their discovery. A small brass candlestick holder, a worn prayer book written in what appeared to be Spanish but with unusual phrases, and a piece of fabric with embroidered symbols that matched some of the designs on Joaquin's ring. "Carmen, do you remember any special phrases or words that great-grandmother used? Anything that seemed different from normal Spanish?" Carmen thought carefully. She had certain blessings she would say over the bread and candles. "I remember some of the words but never understood what they meant. Something like Baruch and other words that weren't Spanish." Emma's hands trembled as she realized Carmen was describing Hebrew blessings that had been preserved for over a century in their family's traditions. "Tia, I think these customs were never just Hispanic traditions. I think they were Jewish traditions that our ancestors preserved in secret." Carmen stared at the contents of the wooden box, seeing them with new understanding. So Joaquin's ring wasn't just jewelry, it was a way of honoring ancestors who had kept these traditions alive despite centuries of danger. Emma nodded. "And the fact that we've continued some of these practices, even without understanding their original meaning, shows how successfully our ancestors preserved their heritage." Carmen was quiet for a long time, processing the implications of their discovery. Finally, she spoke. "This explains so much about why certain family stories always seemed incomplete, why there were gaps in our genealogy, why some traditions seemed so important but no one could explain why." To further investigate their family's possible Sephardic Jewish heritage, Emma decided to pursue genetic testing and additional genealogical research. She contacted a genetic counselor who specialized in Jewish ancestry and arranged for both herself and Carmen to take comprehensive DNA tests that could identify Sephardic Jewish markers. While waiting for the genetic results, Emma dove deeper into historical records, this time looking specifically for evidence of converso families in early New Mexican colonial documents. She discovered that Spanish colonial authorities had been suspicious of certain families and had conducted periodic investigations into Judaizing practices among supposedly Catholic colonists. In the archives of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, Emma found Inquisition records from the 1600s that mentioned several families with surnames similar to Rodriguez who had been investigated for maintaining Jewish practices. While these records didn't definitively prove her family's connection, they established that crypto-Jewish families had indeed been present in early New Mexico. The genetic testing results arrived 6 weeks later and provided compelling evidence for Emma's theory. Both she and Carmen showed significant Sephardic Jewish ancestry markers, with genetic connections to Jewish populations from Spain, Portugal, and North Africa, exactly the pattern expected for descendants of Iberian Converso families. The genetic evidence strongly supports Sephardic Jewish ancestry, explained Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the genetic counselor. The specific markers suggest ancestors from the Jewish communities of medieval Spain who would have been affected by the Inquisition and subsequent dispersal. Emma also discovered that genealogical DNA databases contained connections to other New Mexican families with similar genetic patterns, suggesting a broader network of crypto-Jewish descendants throughout the Southwest. Armed with this genetic evidence, Emma contacted the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, an organization dedicated to researching hidden Jewish heritage in Hispanic families. She learned that her family's story was part of a much larger phenomenon affecting hundreds of New Mexican families. Your discovery contributes to our understanding of how Sephardic Jewish heritage was preserved and transmitted across centuries, explained Dr. Michael Rodriguez, no relation, the Society's president. The ring your great-great-grandfather commissioned represents one of the most sophisticated examples of crypto-Jewish material culture we've documented. The Society was particularly interested in Kowalczyk's detailed records, which provided rare documentation of how crypto-Jewish families in the territorial period had consciously preserved their heritage through commissioned artwork and jewelry. Emma also learned about modern Jewish communities in New Mexico that welcomed people discovering Sephardic heritage, offering resources for those interested in reconnecting with Jewish traditions and learning about their ancestors' religious practices. The beautiful thing about your family's story, Dr. Rodriguez observed, is that the traditions were never completely lost. Your Aunt Carmen has been lighting Shabbat candles and making challah for decades without realizing she was maintaining Jewish customs. Emma realized that Joaquin's ring had accomplished exactly what he had intended. It had preserved evidence of their family's heritage until a descendant was ready to understand and appreciate its significance. 6 months after discovering the mysterious ring in the 1901 photograph, Emma's understanding of her family identity had been completely transformed. What began as curiosity about an unusual piece of jewelry had revealed a rich heritage of cultural survival, religious preservation, and family courage that spanned 5 centuries. Emma organized a family gathering at Carmen's house in Albuquerque, bringing together relatives from throughout New Mexico to share their discoveries about the family's Sephardic Jewish heritage. She had prepared a detailed presentation combining the historical evidence, genetic testing results, and cultural analysis that explained how their ancestors had maintained Jewish traditions in secret for generations. Our family story is more complex and more remarkable than we ever imagined, Emma told the assembled relatives as she displayed enlarged photographs of Joaquin's ring alongside translations of its symbols. We are not just descendants of Spanish colonists. We are also descendants of Jewish families who survived centuries of religious persecution through courage, creativity, and cultural determination. Carmen demonstrated some of the family traditions that they now understood to be preserved Jewish customs, teaching younger family members the Hebrew blessings that their great-great-grandmother had disguised as Catholic prayers. The family decided to continue these traditions with full knowledge of their origins, honoring both their Catholic and Jewish heritage. Emma had also arranged for a special guest at the family gathering, Rabbi Sarah Goldstein from Temple Beth Shalom in Santa Fe, who specialized in helping crypto-Jewish families reconnect with their heritage. Rabbi Goldstein brought copies of Sephardic prayers and traditions that matched many of the family's preserved customs. Your ancestors showed incredible wisdom in preserving these traditions, Rabbi Goldstein explained. They understood that identity and heritage are too precious to lose, even when maintaining them requires secrecy and sacrifice. The family also decided to honor Abraham Kowalczyk, the Polish jeweler, whose detailed records had made their discovery possible. They commissioned a plaque for the Santa Fe Jewish community, recognizing his role in preserving crypto-Jewish heritage through his artistic work. Emma's research had also attracted attention from the New Mexico History Museum, which invited her to create an exhibit about crypto-Jewish families in the Southwest. The exhibit, titled Hidden Heritage, Jewish Identity in New Mexican Families, featured Joaquin's ring as its centerpiece, along with stories from other families who had discovered similar hidden histories. This ring, Emma told visitors during the exhibit's opening, represents the determination of our ancestors to preserve their identity despite centuries of danger. It also reminds us that family histories are often more complex and beautiful than we realize. The museum exhibit inspired other New Mexican families to investigate their own potential crypto-Jewish heritage, leading to additional discoveries and a growing awareness of the Southwest's complex cultural history. For Emma personally, the discovery had created a deeper connection to both her Hispanic and Jewish identities. She began learning Hebrew, studying Jewish history, and participating in both Catholic and Jewish communities in Santa Fe, honoring the full complexity of her heritage. As she looked at the 1901 photograph that had started her journey, Emma realized that Joaquin's decision to commission the ring and wear it prominently in his formal portrait had been an act of faith that someday a descendant would be curious enough and brave enough to uncover the truth about their family's remarkable story. The ring, now displayed in a place of honor in Carmen's home, continued to serve its original purpose, preserving the memory of ancestors who had maintained their identity through impossible circumstances, and reminding future generations that heritage is something worth protecting, even when that protection requires secrecy, creativity, and tremendous courage.